Okay, so today we're going to dig into something pretty crucial for any business out there, especially these days. It's all about understanding and managing those hidden risks that are lurking in your cyber supply chain.
Yeah, that's right. We usually call it C-SCRM for short, cyber supply chain risk management.
Catchy.
It
Yeah.
is. And, it's a big deal because think about it, almost every company, no matter how big or small, relies on this whole web of suppliers, partners, you name it, and they're often spread out all over the globe.
It is a global village, after
It's
all.
exactly. And while that interconnectedness can be great for efficiency, streamlining things, making things faster and all, it also opens up these vulnerabilities that cybercriminals, those bad actors, are just waiting to exploit.
It's like leaving a side door unlocked.
Yeah, they might not even come directly for you. They could target a weaker link in your chain, like a smaller supplier who might not have the same level of security, and then use that to get to what they really want, which is your data, your systems, your reputation.
It's kind of like that old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly. And in today's world, that supply chain, it's mostly digital. So we're talking about data flowing between systems, software updates coming from third parties, all sorts of connections that, if not properly secured, can create a huge attack surface.
So we're here to give you the knowledge, the tools, the insights to really tackle this head on.
We want you to walk away from this deep dive feeling empowered, like you've got a solid grasp on what cyber supply chain risk management really is and how to start building a robust strategy for your own business.
And to guide us through this complex world of cyber supply chains, we've got the insights from a true expert in the field, Michael Twining.
He's a cybersecurity professional, and he's actually finishing up his degree, a cybersecurity undergraduate specializing in cyber operations from Utica University. He's set to graduate in May 2025.
Wow, so he's got the academic foundation and the real-world experience to back it all up.
He does, and he's also got some impressive industry certifications under his belt, CompTIA Security Plus and ISC2 certified in cybersecurity, so he really knows his stuff.
And what I really appreciate about Michael's work is his passion for making the digital world a safer place. It really shines through in everything he does.
That's true. He's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk. And that's the kind of expert we need in this field, someone who's truly dedicated to helping businesses protect themselves and their customers.
Absolutely. So for today's deep dive, we'll be drawing from a series of articles that Michael has written on this very topic. We're going to distill his key insights, break them down into manageable steps, and give you a clear roadmap to building a strong cyber supply chain risk management strategy for your own business.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
Okay, so where does Michael suggest we even begin this journey?
Well, the very first step, and something Michael emphasizes throughout his work, is identifying your critical assets.
Critical assets, what exactly do we mean by that?
Think of them as the lifeblood of your organization, the products, the services, the data, anything that's absolutely essential for your business to function and achieve its objectives.
Okay, so the things you absolutely can't live with, the things that if they were to be compromised or disrupted, it would seriously impact your business.
Exactly. Those are your critical assets, and those are the areas where your protection efforts need to be the strongest.
Makes sense, but identifying critical assets, it might sound kind of straightforward at first glance, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just saying, hey, our main product that's important. What specific steps does Michael lay out to really dig deep and figure this out?
Well, he starts by emphasizing the importance of clearly defining your core business objectives. What are you really trying to achieve as a company? What are the essential functions that drive your success?
Right, so it's about taking a step back and looking at the big picture first.
Exactly. Once you have a solid understanding of those objectives, then you can start identifying the key resources that directly support them.
And I imagine those resources can be both tangible and intangible.
Absolutely. So we're talking about tangible assets like your physical infrastructure, your equipment, your facilities, but also intangible assets like your intellectual property, your trade secrets, those proprietary algorithms that give you a competitive edge, even things like your customer data. That's a huge asset for many businesses.
And something Michael points out in his work is that many businesses make the mistake of only considering the assets that directly generate revenue.
That's right. But he stresses the importance of looking beyond that and considering the enabling systems, the people, the processes that are crucial for those revenue-generating activities.
So even if something doesn't directly bring in money, if it's essential for your operations, it should be considered a critical asset.
Precisely. So it's really about taking a holistic view of your business and understanding all the interconnected pieces that contribute to your success.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's say we've gone through this process and we've identified all these key resources, both tangible and intangible. What's the next step in this critical asset identification phase?
The next step is to assess the impact of loss for each of these key resources.
So basically, if something were to happen to one of these assets, if it were to be disrupted or compromised in some way, what would be the consequences?
Exactly how would it impact your day-to-day operations, your relationship with customers, your financial stability?
I imagine that would vary greatly depending on the specific asset we're talking about.
Absolutely. For instance, losing access to your email server for a few hours might be inconvenient, but it's probably not going to cripple your business. But if your entire production line were to shut down for a week, that could have a significant impact on your revenue and your ability to deliver to your customers.
So it's about really thinking through the worst case scenario for each asset and understanding the potential ripple effects.
Precisely. And this is where you might start to see some of those aha moments that we talked about earlier.
Those moments where you suddenly realize that something you hadn't given much thought to is actually far more crucial than you initially thought.
Exactly. You might discover that a seemingly minor piece of software or a specific vendor you rely on is actually integral to a core business function and therefore needs a higher level of protection.
And conversely, you might find that you're overspending on security measures for something that, while important, wouldn't actually have a catastrophic impact on your business if it were to be temporarily disrupted.
Right. It's about getting a much clearer picture of your true dependencies and where your most significant vulnerabilities lie.
Okay, so we've identified our key resources. We've assessed the potential impact of their loss. Now, what?
Now we move on to prioritization.
Prioritization. So we're basically ranking our assets based on their importance to the business.
Exactly. And this is crucial because you can't protect everything with the same level of intensity you need to focus your resources and your efforts where they'll have the biggest impact.
So we're talking about creating a tiered system where the most critical assets get the most attention and resources.
Right. And this prioritization should be based on a combination of factors, including the potential impact of loss, the likelihood of a threat targeting that specific asset, and of course, your organization's overall risk tolerance, which we'll discuss in more detail later.
So it's not just about what's the most expensive or the most visible asset. It's about what's truly essential for the business to survive and thrive.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that this prioritization is not a one-time exercise. It's an ongoing process.
Right, because as your business evolves, your priorities might shift as well.
Absolutely. You might introduce new products or services, expand into new markets, change your reliance on certain technologies. All of these things can impact which assets are the most critical at any given time.
So it's about having a system in place to regularly review and update your list of critical assets to make sure it's always reflecting your current business reality.
Exactly. You need to stay agile and adaptable in your approach to cyber supply chain risk management because the threat landscape is constantly evolving and your business is evolving too.
Okay, so we've covered the first crucial step, identifying our critical assets. Now let's move on to the next stage, what comes after we've got a clear understanding of what we need to protect.
Well, once you know what's most important to your business, the next step is to assess the risks that are specifically associated with those critical assets within your supply chain.
Okay, so we're moving from what to protect to what are we protecting it from.
Exactly. And this means looking beyond the walls of your own organization and understanding the potential threats that could come from your extended network of partners and suppliers.
Right, because in today's interconnected world, a security breach at one of your vendors could potentially have a ripple effect across your entire supply chain.
Exactly. And that's why this risk assessment phase is so crucial. It's about identifying those potential points of failure and understanding the likelihood and the severity of those potential risks.
So what are some of the key steps that Michael outlines for this risk assessment phase?
He talks about the importance of first identifying potential threats. And this needs to be a broad and comprehensive effort. You need to consider a wide spectrum of potential risks.
And I imagine that includes both cyber threats and physical threats.
Absolutely. So on the cyber side, you're thinking about things like malware infections, ransomware attacks, data breaches originating from third-party systems, social engineering attempts, all those things.
Right. Those are the digital threats that are constantly evolving and becoming more sophisticated.
Exactly. But it's also crucial to consider the physical threats that could disrupt your supply chain.
So things like natural disasters impacting a key vendor's facilities, or even broader disruptions like geopolitical instability or major economic downturns.
Precisely those kinds of events can have a huge impact on your ability to get the materials or the services you need to keep your business running smoothly.
It's like that old saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Exactly, and this is where a lot of businesses fall short. They focus too much on the immediate cyber threats and don't give enough consideration to the broader risks that could disrupt their supply chain.
It's about having that big picture perspective and understanding all the potential points of failure.
Right. And once you've identified those potential threats, the next step is to assess both the likelihood and the potential impact of each threat.
So how probable is it that this particular threat will actually materialize? And if it does, what would be the consequences for our business, especially in relation to those critical assets we identified earlier?
Exactly. And this evaluation of both likelihood and impact is absolutely crucial for prioritizing your risk management efforts.
Because you wouldn't necessarily put the same amount of effort into preparing for a highly unlikely low-impact event as you would for something that's more likely and could potentially cripple your business.
Right. It's about allocating your resources strategically and focusing on the threats that pose the most significant risk to your operations.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us to another key point that Michael emphasizes: understanding and defining your organization's risk tolerance.
That's right, because every business is different, and what one organization might consider an acceptable level of risk, another might find completely unacceptable.
So it's about having an honest conversation internally and really understanding how much risk you're willing to take on.
Exactly what level of potential disruption, financial loss, or reputational damage are you comfortable with?
And that risk tolerance will vary widely depending on the nature of your business, the industry you're in, your financial situation, all sorts of factors.
For example, a small startup with limited resources might have a higher tolerance for certain risks simply because they don't have the same level of resources to invest in mitigation strategies as a larger, more established company.
But a larger company, especially one in a highly regulated industry like finance or healthcare, might have a much lower risk tolerance because the potential consequences of a breach or a disruption are much greater.
Exactly. They might be dealing with sensitive customer data or have strict regulatory requirements to comply with, so their risk tolerance will be much lower.
And it's interesting to think about the types of threats that businesses might initially overlook or underestimate.
Yeah, sometimes those seemingly minor vulnerabilities can turn out to be the most dangerous because they're not on your radar.
Like maybe a cloud-based service that you use for internal communication, but it hasn't been properly secured and it becomes a backdoor for attackers.
Exactly. Or for a company with a global supply chain, political instability in a region where a key supplier is located could represent a significant risk that might not be immediately apparent.
So it's really about looking beyond the obvious threats and thinking about those potential vulnerabilities that might be hiding in plain sight.
Right, and that's where having a diverse team involved in the risk assessment process can be really valuable.
Because different people will bring different perspectives and experiences to the table, and that can help you identify those blind spots that you might have missed otherwise.
Exactly. It's about getting a 360-degree view of your supply chain and your potential risks.
Okay, so we've diligently identified our critical assets. We've thoroughly assessed the associated risks. What's the next logical step in this process?
Well, now we move into the crucial phase of developing concrete risk mitigation strategies.
So this is where we take all the insights we've gained from our risk assessment and start formulating specific plans and actions to minimize the impact of those identified threats.
Precisely. And it's important to keep in mind that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Your mitigation strategies will need to be tailored to your specific business, your critical assets, and your defined risk tolerance.
So what does Michael's approach to developing these strategies typically look like?
Well, he always circles back to the foundational elements we've already discussed. He reiterates the importance of knowing your critical assets, understanding the specific risks, both cyber and physical, that could harm those assets, and of course, keeping your organization's defined risk tolerance firmly in mind.
Right. So it all builds upon those previous steps.
Exactly. And then it's about brainstorming a range of potential mitigation options.
So what are we talking about here? Concrete actions like what?
Well, on the cyber side, this could involve implementing stronger technical security controls.
Things like multi-factor authentication, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, all those things.
Exactly. Those are your first line of defense against cyber threats, making it much harder for attackers to gain access to your systems and your data.
And it's not just about protecting your own systems. It's also about making sure your vendors and partners are adhering to the same security standards.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that everyone in your supply chain is on the same page when it comes to security.
Yeah.
Because a weakness at any point in the chain can potentially compromise the entire system.
Right, so it's about having those contractual obligations in place and making sure that your partners are meeting those security requirements.
Exactly. And you might even go a step further and offer security awareness training to your employees and to your partner's employees.
Because human error is still one of the biggest vulnerabilities in any system.
It is. And sometimes just educating people about the risks and how to avoid them can go a long way in preventing those costly mistakes.
Okay, so what about physical threats?
Yeah.
What are some mitigation options for those?
For physical threats, it's often about having contingency plans in place.
So if your main supplier is hit by a natural disaster, do you have a backup supplier lined up and ready to go?
Exactly. Or if there's political instability in a region where you source a critical material, do you have alternative sourcing options available?
It's about having those what-if scenarios planned out in advance so you're not scrambling to react in the middle of a crisis.
Exactly. And another key aspect of mitigation is having a comprehensive incident response plan.
So if a breach does occur, or if there is a major disruption to your supply chain, do you have a clear step-by-step plan for how you're going to respond and recover?
Exactly. Who's responsible for what actions need to be taken? How are you going to communicate with your customers and your stakeholders?
It's about having that playbook ready to go so you can minimize the damage and get back up and running as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And having that plan in place can also help to reduce the stress and the chaos that inevitably comes with any major incident.
Right, because when something bad happens, you don't want to be making decisions on the fly. You want to have a clear plan that you can follow.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and prepared rather than reactive and scrambling.
Okay, so we've identified a range of potential mitigation options. What's the next step?
Well, once you have those options laid out, you need to carefully evaluate and select the ones that are going to be most effective and practical for your business.
So we're taking into account things like cost effectiveness, feasibility, impact on operations, all those factors.
Precisely. You're looking for that sweet spot between robust security and operational efficiency.
Because you don't want to implement security measures that are so cumbersome and expensive
Yeah.
that they end up hindering your ability to do business.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. And it might mean making some tough choices, but ultimately you need to choose the solutions that are going to provide the best protection for your business without unnecessarily impacting your operations.
Okay, so we've chosen our mitigation strategies now. What?
Now comes the implementation phase. This
Yeah.
is where you actually put those strategies into action.
So we're talking about deploying new software or hardware, updating our security policies and procedures, conducting training sessions, all those things.
Exactly. It's about putting those plans into motion and making sure they're working as intended.
And it's also about continuous monitoring and regular review, right?
Absolutely, because the threat landscape is constantly evolving and your business is evolving too, so your mitigation strategies need to adapt as well.
It's like a continuous improvement cycle,
Yeah.
always looking for ways to enhance your security posture.
Exactly, and it's about being proactive and staying ahead of the curve rather than waiting for something bad to happen before you make changes.
Can you give us a more concrete example here? Let's say our critical asset is our customer relationship management system, our CRM, which contains a lot of sensitive customer data. What might a risk mitigation strategy look like in that case?
Sure. So if your CRM system is a key asset and you've identified a significant risk of unauthorized access or a data breach coming from a third-party vendor that integrates with your CRM, then you might implement a multi-layered mitigation strategy.
So like a defense-in-depth approach.
Exactly. You might start with strong encryption protocols to protect the customer data both in transit and at rest.
So that even if someone were to gain access to the data, they wouldn't be able to read it without the encryption key.
Right. Then you'd also want to implement strict access controls limiting who has access to this sensitive data, both within your organization and among your third-party vendors.
In regularly auditing those access logs to make sure that no one is accessing data they shouldn't be.
Exactly. And contractually, you might require that third-party vendor to adhere to specific security standards and undergo regular security assessments.
So you're not just trusting them blindly, you're verifying that they're actually meeting your security requirements.
Exactly. And you might even consider deploying data loss prevention tools, DLP tools that can monitor the data within the CRM system and alert you to or even prevent any unauthorized attempts to extract sensitive information.
So it's like having a security guard watching over your data 24/7.
It is. And
Yeah.
those DLP tools can be really effective in preventing data breaches because they can identify and stop suspicious activity before it leads to a major incident.
Okay, so we've covered identifying critical assets, assessing risks, developing mitigation strategies, and implementing those strategies. How do we pull all of this together into a cohesive and effective overall approach?
Well, this is where we move into the realm of truly implementing cyber supply chain risk management, not just as a series of tasks, but as a systematic and ongoing process that's embedded into your organization's overall security framework.
It's not just a one-time project. It's something that needs to be integrated into the way you do business.
Exactly. It needs to become part of your company's DNA.
So what are the key elements of this broader implementation phase?
Well, first and foremost, and I can't stress this enough, is that ongoing process of identifying your critical assets. This is the foundation everything else builds upon.
Right, because if you don't know what you need to protect, then all the other steps are pretty much useless.
Exactly. Then you need to continuously assess the risks associated with those critical assets, looking at both the potential impact and the likelihood of cyber incidents originating from your supply chain.
And this is where having a solid understanding of the threat landscape is crucial.
It is you need to be aware of the latest threats, the latest attack vectors, and the latest vulnerabilities so you can proactively address them.
And then based on all of this information, you develop your risk management plan.
Right. This is your roadmap for how you're going to secure your supply chain. It should outline the specific security controls, you'll implement the contractual obligations you'll establish with your partners, and the schedule for regular security assessments.
So it's a comprehensive document that covers all the bases.
It is, and it should be a living document, something that you revisit and update regularly as your business evolves and as the threat landscape changes.
And this is where having buy-in from senior management is crucial, right?
Absolutely, because implementing a robust cyber supply chain risk management program will require resources, time investment, and a willingness to make changes to the way you do business.
It's not something that can be done in a vacuum. It needs to be a company-wide effort.
Exactly, and it needs to be championed from the top down.
And Michael also mentions a great resource for those who want to delve deeper into this topic.
He recommends a free course offered by FedVTE, which is a great place to start for anyone looking to build their foundational knowledge in cybersecurity.
We'll include a link to that course in the show notes.
He also wants to make it clear that he has no affiliation with FedVTE, but he genuinely believes it's a valuable resource, and it aligns with his commitment to making cybersecurity education more accessible.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've talked a lot about setting up the initial plan, but as we all know, cybersecurity is not a static thing. It's constantly evolving. How do we make sure that our efforts stay relevant and effective over time?
That's where ongoing monitoring and regular review come in.
So we're not just setting up the plan and then forgetting about it. It's an ongoing process of checking in, making adjustments as needed.
Exactly. And Michael really emphasizes the importance of establishing key performance indicators, KPIs that you can track to measure the effectiveness of your plan.
So concrete metrics that tell you how well you're doing.
Exactly. Things like the number of attempted or successful cyber attacks that target your supply chain, the actual business impact of any security incidents that occur, and the overall cost of implementing and maintaining your C-SCRM measures.
So those KPIs give you a tangible way to assess the effectiveness of your efforts.
They do, and they can also help you identify areas where you need to make improvements.
Right. So if you're seeing an increase in attacks targeting a particular vendor, then, that's an area where you need to focus more attention.
Exactly, and regular review of those KPIs can also help you spot trends and anticipate potential problems before they become major incidents.
It's like having your finger on the pulse of your supply chain security.
It is, and it allows you to be more proactive in your approach.
And in addition to monitoring those KPIs, Michael also recommends conducting regular full-scale reviews of your entire C-SCRM plan.
Yes, he suggests doing this on a set schedule, maybe quarterly or annually, depending on the dynamism of your industry and the evolving threat landscape.
And those reviews should involve all the relevant stakeholders, right?
Absolutely. So we're talking about senior management IT and security personnel, legal and compliance, your key suppliers, and maybe even your customers if it's appropriate.
So it's a collaborative effort to make sure that your plan is always aligned with your business needs and that everyone is on the same page.
Precisely because at the end of the day, security is a shared responsibility. It's not just the IT department's job, it's everyone's job.
That's a really important point. Okay, so to wrap things up, let's go back to Michael's key insights. What are the most important takeaways that our listeners should remember from this deep dive?
Well, first and foremost, you need to know your critical assets. What are the things that are absolutely essential for your business to function?
Right, because you can't protect everything, so you need to prioritize based on what's most important.
Exactly. Then you need to assess the risks associated with those critical assets, both cyber and physical, looking at both likelihood and potential impact.
And don't forget about your organization's risk tolerance. How much risk are you willing to take on?
Right, then you develop your mitigation strategies, tailoring them to your specific business and your risk tolerance.
And then you implement your C-SCRM plan, making sure that it's integrated into your overall security framework and that everyone is on board with it.
And finally, you need to continuously monitor and review your plan making adjustments as needed to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's a continuous cycle of assess, mitigate, implement, monitor, repeat.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing effort, but it's an effort that's absolutely essential for any business that wants to thrive in today's digital world.
Okay, and on that note, I have a final thought-provoking question for our listeners. What is the one vulnerability that you think businesses most often overlook in their supply chains? And what is one step you can take today to address that